everyone, and today we're going to do part 2 of episode 6, 7, I don't remember now. We're nearly to the end of the first season of Rebel Eaters Club, and I gotta be honest, I'm kind of looking forward to it, because I am tired of the Virgie. I've been covering Virgie for like 3 months now. I'm ready to be done, but I have this thing where I can't not finish something. So I have the second half of this video, 2 more videos after this, and then we are done with Virgie, because it's become abundantly clear to me that her big issue is only partly the fat acceptance rhetoric and the fat acceptance movement. It seems like the bigger issue is some unresolved trauma that she's dealing with and putting it on the fat acceptance rhetoric that she clings to. But for today, let's just go ahead and finish episode 6 of the Rebel Eaters Club.
We're back. Before the break, we were talking about how Soleil is disrupting business as usual with her food writing.
There's a perception that I'm bringing politics into the genre, but the reality is politics have always been present, just in ways that weren't acknowledged as, as nails sticking out of the board in the same way.
Yeah.
I would also say that a lot of people kind of consider my, my positionality as inherently radical, right? And you hinted at that. But I think that what is more interesting, because you can be like me and you can look like me and you can, want to have sex with people that I want to have sex with, but you might want to just uphold the old ways of doing things anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm always wrestling with how do I maintain my politics, maintain the way that I see the process and technique going the way it should go, while also not resting on my identity as the inherently interesting thing about me, because that's also the critique that I get from people who are in bad faith, but also there's a hint of truth there, who say I'm a diversity hire, and I don't ever want to pretend or to just kind of shrug backwards into that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay, it's not really related to being fat or anything, but I do feel sorry for her that she is referred to as the diversity hire. I think that that's always kind of done as a way to delegitimize someone's talent, and I don't like that. It just seems it seems very rude. I can't even think of a good word for it other than it's fucking rude. How about someone just had the talent and got the fucking job? Unless it's the case of nepotism, in which case fucking criticize them all you want, because we all know that person, that daddy has a big part in the company, and so they got it even though they're lazy as fuck and they don't do anything. But aside from that, if the person didn't have any familial relations and got the job, I think to try to delegitimize their accomplishment by saying they were the diversity hire, so it was basically their race that or their sexuality or their gender orientation or not gender gender identity, sexual orientation, there we go, that got them that position. It just feels like such a fucking cop-out, and it feels like sour fucking grapes is what it feels like.
I do know what you mean. Can we go back into your background? What was food like growing up for you?
So my family's Vietnamese. They're Vietnamese refugees. I'm the first generation to be born in the U.S. My grandmother raised me when I was very young in Illinois, where my family was put. And then my mom moved my sister and I out to New York to go into fashion, which was very exciting. And she was a single mom for most of the time. And a lot of our meals were simple, TV dinner type things. But then once in a while it would be delivery. Because, in New York, we lived in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Everybody delivered. McDonald's delivered in the 90s, which is, nothing now. Everyone
Did
does.
not know that. That's amazing. Continue.
Yeah. There's a number you could call that would route you to the nearest McDonald's. And it was 212-337-FAST.
I love that you remember this.
And they actually remembered our orders after a while, which was really embarrassing.
Wait, what was your order?
I think I would get a cheeseburger Happy Meal. My sister would get the chicken nuggets. And so every time we would do it, my mom would fan out the menus, because there were physical menus back then.
Yes.
And she would ask, do you guys want Indian, Chinese, Thai, Vietnamese? What do you want? My palate was developed from that. It wasn't just American or Vietnamese, but it was all of this stuff because I wanted to try, palak paneer or, a burrito or all this stuff. It was really cool in that way.
Was there a point where food became fraught for you?
I can't think of the point. My mom was always on a diet, my whole life. And she would joke that we did it to her, pregnancy. She was always trying to lose that weight. And she was always much smaller than me. And so at the point at which I outpaced her in size, that's when I was like, oh, should I be worried about this?
Right.
And she never compelled me to go on a diet or anything like that.
Right.
But it was more just I was in a typical family where talking about weight was kind of a constant thing.
Yeah.
It was just a way for people to make fun of you. So yeah, that was
Okay, so just not to delegitimize her experiences or anything, but that was a pretty stark shift of I was in the family that, weight was always a topic of conversation and it was just a way for them to make fun of you. Was it though? Like she's not giving details so I can't say, but something I've noticed with the fat acceptance people is that they take I mean, the before and after pictures are a perfect example of someone's taking a before and after picture to kind of show the progress for themselves. It's not meant to be directed at anybody, and yet they take it as a personal attack of, oh, you just don't want to be like me, and therefore it's an attack against me. When it was never an attack to begin with, it was a look at the progress I've made in my weight loss that I want for myself. So I don't know. She didn't go into any details with that, but that's one does not directly connect to the other for me of weight was always a topic of conversation in my family to it was a way for them to make fun of me. Maybe it was like a genuine point of ridicule for her, but I'm wondering like was it talking about oh we need to maybe there was some talk with her in the room of you need to work on not feeding her so much fast food so she can lose weight. Was that the topic of conversation, or was that I don't necessarily think that in itself is meant to make fun of her. I don't think that that was a point of ridicule for her. I think that was a point of family members being concerned, but that's a completely hypothetical situation that she didn't actually mention, so I don't know. I don't know. There's just with I feel kind of bad about this, but at the same time, there have been so many times when fat acceptance people say that a completely benign action or phrase not even geared towards anyone else but the speaker themselves is somehow an attack on them. So I can't help but be skeptical at this point anytime they say anything related to weight was an automatic point of ridicule or something.
That was a contradictory, like weird part of my upbringing that I think a lot of people probably could relate to.
Yeah.
Where you're just, people are always talking about fat people and you're always afraid of fat people. Like the specter of fatness is always chasing you. And as they give you like that second helping of noodles or whatever.
Yes.
It's like, whatever, guys. And so you realize over time, like that this isn't about food. I luckily kind of escaped any sort of disordered feeling about food. Because it was my primary thing of interest besides video games, was like eating.
Yes.
So if I lost that, I don't know what else I would have.
Totally.
I think I tried to go on a diet once and I was just like a total failure because like, I didn't want to do it. Couldn't do it.
So that thing, I mean, she makes a good point of, always talking about it's not good to be fat and stuff as they're putting more noodles on your plate. And I agree that that's a bit of, I think that's a common thing in a lot of families. This was common even in points during my childhood, my young adulthood. It's like I'm trying to lose weight. Yeah, I definitely understand you want to lose weight. Oh, but here, have some more of this. And they make kind of excuses as to, oh, it's a holiday, or, oh, I made it though. Oh, I XYZ. And there is a bit of an issue around that. And it's frustrating. It can definitely be frustrating, and I'm not going to deny that. I don't think that that's meant to ridicule you and like I don't know. She didn't say this, but the feeling I got from what she said was that it's like, they're talking about fat people and stuff, but then as they pile more food onto your plate, and so it's like they're doing that to keep you a point of ridicule, but I don't think that's what they were doing. She didn't explicitly say that, but that was kind of the sense that I got from what she was saying, and I could be completely off on that. I feel like this episode isn't going to be particularly interesting.
Yeah, I mean they suck pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
You literally have a person's salary's worth of, that's your budget for eating for the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this incredible array of food experiences. Many of them are sort of in these traditionally referred to as like fine dining establishments. Can you kind of talk about the role of fat phobia and food anxiety in those spaces?
It's really interesting when people who are, trying to insult me or whatever, because that happens, people get really heated over restaurant reviews. They talk about my weight, which is just like funny to me because like, what do you expect?
Yes.
When you eat for a living? Like, you're not going to be Gwyneth Paltrow.
Well, I mean, but there is this kind of mythology because our idea of a foodie is a thin person.
Right.
Our idea of sort of somebody who's like this aspirational gourmand is consistently, I mean, not only like a cisgender man, but also a thin person. And I kind of
For the record, I've never seen when someone says the word foodie, cisgendered. I think they said straight. Maybe they didn't, but that's where they're going to. A white, thin man is not who I think of when I think of foodie. That being said, I tend to conflate like foodie and then the celebrity chefs that we see. So for me, it was like Rachel Ray, or just some of the people that we see in like the Food Network places. And for me, it's always been like a slightly chubby woman when I think foodie. But that's me, and I understand that that may not be the thought for everybody. But whatever.
I don't want to unpack that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the perception of the restaurant critic or the foodie or whatever is that they are an expert. And when you're an expert, you don't consume to excess.
No, I never considered a foodie an expert. I mean, a restaurant critic, yes, you consider them an expert. A foodie always. So when someone calls themselves a foodie, and this is just me kind of being a petty bitch, and I apologize, but it is what it is. When someone calls themselves a foodie, I tend to think that they are a pretentious Yelp and Instagram person where they kind of pride themselves on knowing all of the local restaurants and having tried a lot of them, but at the same time looking down on those that will still go to like a chain restaurant or something. It's more of an air of like a pretentious attitude that I get from foodies as opposed to like a sense of expertise. I tend to view foodies as more of a very experienced amateur, if that makes sense. And I could be completely wrong. This is just this is my association with the word, just to kind of create a counterpoint to what they're saying.
Right? And like when you have a body that's larger, that is a symbol of excess. Right? It's a symbol of you not having control, whereas like expertise is the ultimate control.
Yes.
So like how do you square that circle?
Oh, so like, yes. Yes.
I think it's also kind of a function of are you willing to respect a fat person? For a lot of people who don't think very hard about it, probably not.
Right.
Right. Like the fat person's a joke. They're not someone you listen to. But it takes a lot of work to taste all this food, to eat all this food, and actually like think deep thoughts about it beyond.
So the thing is, though, is that what they're saying, like saying that no one would take like a fat person seriously. There's also that adage of never trust a thin chef. So not that I agree with that per se, but like I think especially in the food realm, people understand that most people that work in the food industry, like chefs and the critics and stuff, aren't going to be rail thin. Some of them are, but I think like a general acceptance is that they tend to skew more on the heavier side, not morbidly obese, just a bit chubbier. Probably if you had to like put them in a BMI, people in the food industry to me tend to fall more in the overweight category. I don't see them as like 400 pounds, but they could be kind of walking that line between a healthy weight and obesity, so they're kind of in that overweight category. That's how I've seen people in the food industry. I'm curious to know your perspective. Like when you think of foodie, when you think of food critic, when you think of like major players in food industries, what's a general picture that you have of them? I'm very curious. I'm very curious to see like the general thoughts versus what they are saying here.
I had the steak, it was too salty. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you're not just taking one bite and like, okay, that was pretty good, and then like move on.
Right.
Like that's a very shallow way of engaging. And you also wouldn't trust someone who only ordered one thing and left and then like wrote a whole article about it, right?
Right.
It's real work. It's a real job.
Yes.
So for someone to insult me based on how I look or whatever is just completely like, what are you trying? Like it's nonsensical. Insult me for what I do.
My emergence as someone who became interested in food in a nerdy way was highly connected with my experience of fat phobia. Essentially, right, like I'm in high school, I'm horny, I'm a nerd, I desperately want a boyfriend and no one will date me because I'm a fat pariah, right? And I turned to, a phone personal service. Essentially, I started talking to older businessmen. All that to say, right, like my first experiences going on dates were actually at fine dining establishments in San Francisco. Food became a site or
So I don't know what it is with Virgie, but I always feel like she's not just sharing, but like maybe trying, and that it's not even one upping, but like trying to put herself on a similar level of her her guests, and it's not just a matter of relating experience. I don't know what it is, but when she's like, I was kind of nerdy around food. From everything that I've seen, from the book that we read, the articles that we looked at, this podcast that we've looked over, she has never struck me as a nerdy food person. Like, granted, when I think nerdy food people, I think of people that watch Good Eats and learn about the science behind the foods, and that Cooking for Nerds cookbook where there's a little bit more of that, or even people kind of like what we're seeing with Soleil, who kind of thinks food in broader terms than just what you're eating. Virgie never entered that realm for me. She's a consumer. She is by and large a consumer, and if I miss something with Virgie and know she is this nerdy food person, please let me know. But from everything that I've seen of Virgie, everything that we've looked at over this past summer, she's not someone I would define as like a nerdy food person. She's someone who enjoys food. The two are not necessarily connected.
Or a location of a lot of tension for me, because I began to see not only these people, like these white businessmen, as these sort of heroic figures, because I could tell from how they were being treated by others that they were respected. In my mind, there's this sort of cross-wiring that occurred around like white masculinity, fine dining, getting away from my roots. Do you know what I'm talking about? That kind of like circuitry that begins to occur.
I have to take what she's saying here with a grain of salt, because I'm not saying that she didn't internalize some of those things, but largely that wasn't necessarily society. We even saw it with some of her examples in her book. The guys that she went out with to these fine dining establishments seemed to have been focused on her youth and were very predatory in nature. We came across a couple of guys in her book that seemed a little predatory. One guy that seemed very predatory and was doing this thing to kind of impress a young, impressionable person that was still technically a teenager. Like, it's not... I don't think that Virgie's experience could really stand in for what's perceived as the norm. And her internalization of it, I think, is more this whole thing of seeing, white men and getting away from her culture, and her kind of seeking that approval kind of stems more from her childhood trauma than it does from societal expectations.
Yes, it's called ideology.
I mean, do you have experience with this? I'm just curious, like, what is your wiring like?
Oh, God, that's a hell of a question. I think a lot of the way I think has very much been informed by really not liking myself. And I still don't really like myself. I never really like myself. I dissociate constantly, and it's a very exercised muscle, my ability to kind of feel like an alien. And in later life, I've been able to use that to my advantage as an analytical kind of mode.
Yes, I relate.
Yeah. And I think it also made me feel very judgmental. But so like trying to figure out, okay, what's the line between my personal sense of pettiness and actually like rigorous kind of study and thinking about how things are connected. For me, that's been my struggle. And also like, why would I be judgmental if I'm shit? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? See,
No, there can actually absolutely be people that don't think very highly of themselves but then judge the shit out of others. I think it's actually people that tend to be more comfortable with themselves that judge people less. Well, to a degree. That's kind of a fine line to walk.
See, this is me talking to the therapist I don't have. Thank you.
Yes.
But the thing is, there's so much that is kind of pulled into that, because there's like, me being the child of refugees who don't really belong, and also not being able to speak to them in Vietnamese and not feeling like I belong with my family either, and then being the only out queer person in my family. Like all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about this theme of belonging, because I mean, as I've been talking to people, I've been thinking a lot and hearing a lot of stories about how food can be this locus of alienation or of belonging or of...
Okay, I'm sorry. Gotta jump in there of food can be alienation or belonging. Like, variety of things can be a source of alienation or belonging. It's not, in this sense of alienation, is not singularity about weight. There's all sorts of stuff, even outside of like the major ones of race and culture, even outside of that, there's sometimes you're just the weird kid and you feel very alien from all of your peers. Sometimes you're just that adult that can't fucking socialize to save their fucking life, and they always feel like a fraud when they do it. I'm not saying that perhaps there's some intersection of this, that's a possibility, but I think squaring it all on this, as Virgie tends to do with food, is a very narrow look at the general issues around the feelings of alienation and isolation versus those that can bring comfort or a sense of belonging.
Of faking it, or you know what I mean, or of feeling like you're passing, or and it has all of these meanings. What does it have for you?
I love food. I love eating food. I love like tasting new things. At the same time, it's a reminder that pleasure hides so many things behind it. So for me, it's an embodiment of that anxiety of just like, I can't trust this feeling of good because there's always something behind it, which is true though.
Yeah,
it's not just paranoia. It's so true.
Right, but it's like the privilege is really the not having to have that thought.
Yes. I find it really fascinating as a food critic because, the things that a food critic is thought to like are very much, demographically based, right, to say it nicely. So the things that I like are very different, right? And like it is a lot of people's jobs to figure out what I like, me personally,
right,
what I enjoy. And so often when I see a dissonance in that, I'm just like, oh, wow, this is so interesting. When they try to appeal to me as if I were an old white man, I'm just like, ooh. The easiest example is like when I went to the French Laundry, right?
Yes.
And the chef owner, Thomas Keller, took me and my friend, a colleague, on a tour. He showed us the wine room where they have like the tens of thousands of bottles of wine. And I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. It's a lot. Then in the wine room, there's this humidor. And then like they offered me a cigar, but I never smoked a cigar in my life. And I was like, why? What? Like, first of all, I think of them as really gross. And when anyone smokes a cigar near me, I'm just like, ugh, what?
Yes.
What are you? Some like a political cartoon? Like, what is this?
Yes.
I would never offer anyone a cigar unless I knew for a fact, like, oh yeah, this guy, cigar freak.
Yes.
Just had a baby. Like, yeah, let's do it. But like,
Yes.
so it was very much, it felt like an imposition that was strange. Like, are you offering this to someone who's not here? Like a ghost that's hovering behind me? Like, what is this?
Yes.
You know what I mean? In that way, I felt like they were trying to appeal to someone that I wasn't.
I can't say I completely disagree with what she's saying here. To a certain extent, I do understand. There's also just this thing of like certain businesses, especially businesses that have been around for a while, or like the wine enthusiast community and stuff. I'm not part of them, so I really can't say. My experience has been more in like gaming spheres, primarily a little bit of crafting spheres, but there's predefined norms that you're kind of stepping into that have been around for at least a couple of decades. In the case of like wine enthusiasts, probably at least a century. I understand that there's this like general idea of like, why would you offer me this? That seems so weird because you're coming in as an outsider. I agree. I don't really understand the purpose of offering people cigars. I think a lot of people in like millennials and Gen Z aren't big fans of cigarettes or cigars. It's kind of gross. But that is a predetermined norm that's been around for a while. Doesn't mean it can't change. But I don't know. I just kind of have this problem with equating everything that doesn't fit their idea of what it should be as, oh, this is a cis straight white man thing. Sometimes it is, like, definitely the cigars. I'm not gonna lie, it does, when you think of it, you think of, at least for me, I tend to think of Victorian white men all smoking, talking with those cigars. So I understand to a degree. But I don't know.
Like, I don't know. I don't even know if this is a question, but I'm kind of thinking about like this idea of you being a tastemaker. Your relationship to food has this utility that's really fascinating.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, I am trying to change other people's relationships to food.
Yes.
We know that taste isn't universal when we think about cilantro people, for instance.
Yes.
For them, they taste soap. So in that way, taste is very much personal. Like for so many people, taste is personality. Whether you're talking about Star Wars or Italian wine or, anything else, right? And that's when things get dangerous, I think. Any sort of critique of that thing is going to drive you into a rage, because that is an attack on you personally. So that's one aspect of it that I've experienced this year.
Yes. You represent, to maybe the person who's been reading the San Francisco Chronicle for a long time and reading the food section, and you represent, or would you call it a threat to their worldview, or like what would you call that?
I think for some, yes. I think that's the only reason why people would send hate mail, right? It's like, oh, obviously they feel threatened or they're scared or they feel a violent objection to like whatever I'm doing. That's the explanation that I have, at least. Because you've invested so much money and time and travel or whatever in developing your sense of taste, if the person who is a tastemaker doesn't care about some or all of those things, then where does that leave you? And, I think anyone who tries to kind of shake the foundation of like, for instance, like French food being superior or American food being superior, whatever, to the mongrel race.
Okay, very few people think American food is superior, except maybe American nationalists. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and claim that American food is superior by any means. Like, I don't know. I just, like, there's definitely Americanized versions of everything, and they're always, like, I tend to like them because I've grown up in America, I live in America, and so Americanized versions of international cuisines are what I know. I can fully recognize that those are basically bastardized versions of authentic cuisine, and that they're not they're probably not, and that they're not better than what the authentic stuff was, even if I prefer them, because it's how I grew up. So the French thing, though, I mean, honestly, I'm sorry, I do think that quite a bit of French food is probably some of the best. Like baking, pastries, the French have it. I'm sorry, but they do. The French all have it locked down on pastries and baking and that type of shit. Like a French croissant is the fucking best. I do think that doesn't mean that there aren't good things from other cultures, and I understand that there is this general pervasive thought that French cuisine is the best cuisine. To a degree, it didn't become like that through sheer racism. Like, the French have a lot of fantastic food. Some of it's weird, but a lot of the food, especially again with baked goods, is fucking top tier. And I think that's kind of shifted away some with how the world has become more integrated and talking with more people and trying more cuisines. There is, like, when I think of a nice healthy dish, I think of this chicken stir fry that I get from this Japanese restaurant, because it is the best way chicken stir fry is handled. They have the best sauce, they have the best everything. So I don't know. I think that it kind of depends on what type of food you're looking at. When you think of indulgent food, you think of the French, because their food is very indulgent. Healthy foods, when I think of healthy foods, a lot of times what comes to mind is Asian dishes from a couple of different cuisines. Japanese is tends to be my go-to, but Korean is also very popular, Vietnamese, Thai food, that sort of thing. And while there's plenty of unhealthy foods in those cuisines, I'm not saying there isn't. When I think of, like, the healthier cuisines, I think of more Asian countries. For better or worse, whatever that is. So, I don't know. I think that it's less of a matter of looking at, like, Western foods as strictly superior and more weighing the pros and cons of different cuisines from around the world.
This food of brown people, that's going to be seen as an attack.
Yes. Well, I mean, right, it seems, maybe to the average person, it would seem kind of extreme for someone to write hate mail to a restaurant critic.
Yeah, you would think. But they all claim to be normal people, so.
Right. I guess, like, and this is sort of a theoretical existential question, but those are my favorite. What are you coming for? What do they feel like you're coming for when they're writing this mail to you?
Oh, God. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a portion of it that is like a generational kind of conflict, I think, where I am just another millennial coming for boomers, I guess. Or
I can see that for sure. I think that there's more generational conflict now than there has been before, partially because of that whole thing for a while where it seemed like millennials were to blame for everything, and so there's this general, even though millennials are all adults now, many have reached middle age even, it's still there's this discrediting of millennials and Gen Z perspective for some reason. So I can definitely see how I would even go back to the cigar reference. I would say they played a lot into like gender, sexuality, and race when they were describing people that would actually take cigars. But I think actually a generational difference would be a better analogy, because that was very much a boomer and older generation sort of thing to do with cigars and wine, whatever else was involved in that example. So I could see that.
I'm just a hater,
Yeah.
and they can't abide that. Although, why are you reading a restaurant review if you don't want to read any criticism of anything?
Right.
And, for me to talk about things that are facts, like colonialism, to use the word white, they're seen as like extremely radical.
Yes.
Sure, it's inherently political, but everything is. If I can change the way people think about, for instance, Vietnamese food and like why we consume it, why it looks the way it does, all that stuff, and maybe the next time they get a banh mi, they think about it, they think about colonialism, they think about like, oh wow, like the resilience of these people for making this kind of food under the feet of French colonizer. That's so interesting. To me, that's really important.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thanks for all the squid.
Recently, I went into this little bookshop down the street from my house. I was looking for a gift for my boyfriend's niece, Adeline. Adeline has long hair down to her waist, loves the movie Frozen, and pronounces my name Voji. She was turning 4, and we wanted to find her something for the burgeoning feminist. And as I was browsing, I picked up a book called Fry Bread, a Native American Family Story by Kevin Noble Millard. It goes, fry bread is food. Fry bread is time. Fry bread is sound. Fry bread is us. And then there's this page. Fry bread is history. The long walk, the stolen land, strangers in our own world with unknown food. We made new recipes from what we had. And I stood there in the shop thinking about fry bread and Soleil, and I felt so grateful that this beautiful little book summed up everything I hope to get at in Rebel Eaters Club. I've spent this entire season talking with amazing people about food from different perspectives. Mia and I talked about how food is family. Bailey and I talked about how food is healing. Deb and I talked about how food is fun. Chef Fresh and I talked about how food is land. Shay and I talked about how food is comfort. And Soleil and I talked about how food is political. The food we have access to and how we prepare it has a history, sometimes a violent one, of turning wars, struggle, famine, resiliency, and hope into craft, into something nourishing, celebratory, connective, delicious. I hope this season of Rebel Eaters Club so far has helped you see food as more than calories or a commodity. We've talked about diet culture too, that thing that gets in the way of understanding how complicated and powerful food is. It takes away the healing, the fun, and the potential that can come from our relationships with ourselves too, and with each other. I hope this season of Rebel Eaters Club has helped you begin the breakup with diet culture. It is long overdue, girl. Because we are masses of stardust who have the limitless capacity to experience and share pleasure, connection, healing, delight.
Okay, I can't. I'm sorry. I can't listen to any more of this. So this episode was a lot harder for me to give commentary on because it was tying so much into racism and colonialism and a variety of things. It was a lot harder for me to comment on because this is not someplace I typically tread. As someone who identifies as white, as someone who tries to be mindful of other people's struggles and my own ignorance to certain things, I found this very difficult to give commentary on in a way that was still constructive towards criticizing like the fat positivity, fat liberationist sort of agenda. That, and quite frankly, I'm very tired of this series. We only have 2 more left, and I really do want to see this through to the end. And given that we only have 2 more videos left, I'm going to do them. But a large portion of this might be cut because I found that when I was talking, I didn't really like where it was going, and so I would like cut myself off halfway through. I've been interrupted several times when recording this, so unfortunately, I'm not thrilled with the way this turned out, but I can only have a first reaction once, and I like to keep these as first reactions. So I'm going to leave it as it is. I apologize if this wasn't super great. Hopefully the next Fat Doctor UK video kind of makes up for it. Thank you for watching, and I think I'm going to just leave it here, and I'll see you next time.